Alek, thank you so much for making time and chatting with me. Just to begin, what is Settle and how did you find yourself starting this company?
Settle is a cash flow management platform for brands. So we're definitely targeting e-commerce CB companies as our hero customer. So what does that mean? When you can break it down into its components, we're really combining accounts payable software with financing. So what we kind of identified was every brand is always have cash flow issues and they're always buying inventory before receiving revenue from it. So the thought was, what if we built this accounts payable platform and then really layered on financing that's really fine-tuned to these specific orders? So we have this product called extended payment terms where we'll effectively pay the vendor directly with Settle's money, and then the brand could pay us back 30 to 150 days later, really depending on their cash conversion cycle. And by really streamlining it into the process, we think we're making it the most frictionless process where brands don't have to spend a lot of time. And then we'll record it all into their accounting software, which is another way for them to save time. So that's us in a nutshell, but we do also have a lot of things in the hopper that we think will be exciting to really help these brands out.
Very good. So were you guys a payment platform first or a financing company first? Which came first, chicken?
Actually, both. I just identified, let's say we were just going to build an accounts payable platform. It's like, how are you actually going to compete against all these players? I really believe you really need to build a 10x better product instead of just slightly better. And this, on the flip side, same thing on the lending side. If we're just going to be lending to companies, then how are we going to be better, especially when we don't have any data or traction? So it was key for me to launch both at the same time, even knowing that it's going to be harder. You're effectively building two companies at the same time. A lot of investors in the early days definitely were like, why are you building two companies? Why don't you do one and then maybe do the other one later? I was like, you don't get it.
Yeah, not your kind of investors to begin with. I imagine a lot of what you're doing is educating startups around debt. A lot of folks may think that debt's scary, that's something to be avoided at all costs. How do you go about educating startups about debt?
Yeah, we're definitely, even if we talk with someone and they don't work with us, that's completely fine too. We just want to give them the information for them to make their own decision. And that's also one reason, like, we don't have any long-term contracts or anything, because I always tell brands, hey, if you don't like us, just like, you have the freedom to leave at any point. So in the same way, we want to make sure we're being very consultative to them and telling about the different options at their disposal and what really differentiates us. We definitely understand that, if you use it improperly, it could really take down your business. But if you use it properly, you could really scale your business in a much more efficient way. And we're really trying to be the most friendly, transparent, honest provider out there, where there aren't any like hidden hooks or anything like that. But also know there are other options that you could take. Some might be easier, some might be harder, some might be cheaper, some might be more expensive. But it's just kind of depending what you're trying to solve for.
What's the right way to use debt?
Yeah, so if you're scaling, then I think it makes a lot of sense, because then effectively you could use that debt instead of your own equity for inventory purposes or marketing purposes, where the ROI from those orders. And effectively, if a debt allows you to buy more at one time, then you can also get some economies of scale, negotiate better rates, negotiate better terms. So the debt might pay for itself and then some. So if you have product market fit and you just know you have to scale a little bit beyond what you can do currently, then I think that's the perfect way to use it. But you definitely don't want to use it for R&D purposes or employees where you don't know what the return is, or the return might be too long for what the terms of the debt are. And for stuff where you're more exploring, like, hey, this is a new product I'm rolling out, I don't know how it's going to perform, that's probably more of an equity play for brands to use.
Yeah, basically with debt, you're buying time. You know what an outcome is, and in that interest, it's just what you're paying in order to accelerate your timeline, is how I've seen it phrased before.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it.
Great. A lot of times, certainly with more traditional banks, people only want to lend money to those people who don't need it. And so one thing I've always been told is that when things are going well, go out, get a line of credit, get a relationship with the bank. You're working with startups who inherently are just risky to begin with. How do you go about evaluating and underwriting a startup?
Yeah, we're definitely looking at every company in a unique way. We realize everyone's a little bit different, so we're not just like running everyone through one algorithm and just being very hands off to it. Especially when we're lending in the amounts of $1 million plus, maybe 5 million, like, it's worth taking the time to look at everything. But we definitely see both of what you say, where some people are coming in looking at us for more like a bridge extension type issue. And that's not what we are. We're not that. If you're going to fold without us in the next few months, like we can't take that risk. We don't have those types of venture outcomes where we could be bad 20%. We really need to be batting 980 really to make it work. But on the flip side, also when people come in for us and they're like so well capitalized, so well everything, is you don't need us. Like you're probably just better off using your cash for now because that's going to return in the next few months. So we're really trying to find that sweet spot where, most of our companies aren't profitable since they're growing purpose. But we definitely want to make sure our companies have enough runway that if something goes out of plan, they're not going to file for bankruptcy.
Makes sense. In addition to inventory financing, what other types of debt should a startup be aware of? Whether or not you guys are offering it today, what's the arrows in the quiver, so to speak?
Yeah. So today we do inventory marketing. Just really when you think about getting the ROI from those orders.
Marketing is more of a play off of ROAS. Is that how you're doing that?
We don't actually do that. We do look at it as conjunction of it, but it's not strictly on that. We're still taking more of a solvency basis on the company, but definitely like, hey, if you have good margins, good return on your ad spend, then like why not help you speed up that timeline like you mentioned. And then we're definitely doing some work onto the receivable side. So especially as these brands start selling into B2B channels, that usually elongates their cash conversion cycle. There's potentially an opportunity there for us to play as well. I think the scariest thing for a brand is when they do their first wholesale order, and especially from a player like Target or Walmart, where it's pretty gigantic. It's like, where do I get this capital? Like, I don't really want to raise equity before, because like if I raise it after, then my valuation is going to be much better. So that's an area we're trying to play and improve on. And then really also on their supplier side, if a brand has cash flow issues, usually the supplier does as well. And they always want to get paid sooner. So that's one area we're really investing in a lot right now.
That's great. What are some of the common mistakes that you see people make when it comes to supply chain finance or debt financing?
Really just being a little bit too aggressive, especially on the projections front. A lot of brands will 5X in a year or 3X in a year. And then for the next year, they're projecting the same. And once you've reached that hurdle, the second hurdle is much harder, both organizationally, but then also just finding enough customers for that. Especially if you start dipping into other channels, which have more unpredictable cash flows. Companies that are just a little bit too aggressive, I think, on their growth instead of taking a little bit more practical approach to it. So yeah, it's risky behavior, really.
Yeah, makes sense. How do you see supply chain finance changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
Great question. Our view is definitely we're really building this network between buyers and suppliers. So really these brands and their suppliers. So we're really trying to streamline efficiencies in that market. And then also I think we'll have an opportunity to really provide data across these parties to help them make better. If we could really help some of our brands negotiate better terms given our backing, then that's something is really a win-win-win for everybody. And then we also want to play a role really in helping these brands source the right suppliers as well that are really across our network. We see it growing into a more holistic product instead of just being this more transactional view.
I love it. Any client success stories you want to share that you could share?
Oh boy, we have a lot. Lalo is definitely one that comes to mind. Just really helping them scale. Some other brands really like working with are Fly by Jing. This has been an incredible scaling story. We're just talking with
what looking like or doing before they met Settle.
There were sub-$1 million brands selling D2C, and now there are just these behemoths that have presence everywhere, either as stores themselves or retail partners, and definitely a huge direct-to-consumer community as well. I was just on the phone with Hopwater. I think they told us, I completely forgot, that they've been with us for about 2 years, and we're only a 2.5-year-old company. So, and they've just grown tremendously. So just a lot of these brands using us in a very cool way to just really scale. And some of the feedback we've gotten from other brands is, I'll never have to raise venture again. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. But if you're operating at a pace that allows you to do that, I think at the end of the day, it will make your current investors less diluted, and will also make every employee, including the founder, less diluted. So cool way we get to help out these brands.
That's great. Yeah. The whole having the fundraise thing, I think, is totally, I hadn't thought about it. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And We definitely fundraised a bunch, so I know the pain, and outside of the cap table, but then also just how much time you have to spend doing it. That's not really growing your business. So I get that pain as well. But where do you see supply chain growing in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. I think that we've gone from this place before the pandemic where supply chain was just this necessary evil, right? You
Mm-hmm.
spend all that money and the stuff needs to happen. And then during the pandemic, we're not out of the pandemic, but we're out of the panic, is
Yep.
what you would call it. But during the pandemic, it was really more of a, hey, how are we going to do this? What are the options that we have? I think post panic, it's really this thought of getting back on the offense. And so I think that there's going to be a major recalibration to just where we produce things and why. And you're already starting to see some of this decoupling with Asia and
Yep.
people wanting to move some types of manufacturing back to North America. And so I think that's going to be a major theme that we'll see. Products are going to probably cost a little bit more if they're produced in North America, but maybe the transit time is much less. And so really where a solution like Settle comes into play is it's less about just funding your business while you're waiting for POs to arrive. And it's more about really being on the offense. If you needed net 120-day terms because you're on a boat for 6, maybe you're taking net 120 terms, you're getting your product delivered in 14 days instead of 60. And so I think that we're moving more toward reactivity and more regionalized supply chains.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, especially when you think about having fail safes in your supply chain. The bigger brands can do that, but what can a smaller brand do? Do they have the resources to do that, or are there partners there with them that can help them with that?
Great. Thank you so much for making time. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Aaron.